Hi, my name is Rats. I am the co-founder and principal financial advisor at Forward Path Advisory. Forward Path Advisory is a financial advice firm out of Melbourne. We provide financial advice to wholesale clients, private clients, and also high net worth families. Today, we're going to have an exciting conversation with the acting CEO of Aura Energy, Dr. Will Goodall, and also Dhanshan Anandarasa, who is the founder and managing director of Anandarasa Advisory. Today's conversation is going to be around the uranium market and also what Aura Energy is doing in the uranium market. It's going to be an exciting conversation. Advice, warnings, and disclaimers. The information in this podcast intended to provide general information only and has been prepared without taking into account any particular person's objectives, financial situation, or needs. Any general advice contained within or given during this presentation, whether orally or in writing, does not consider your individual objectives, financial situation, or needs. Nothing in this presentation is intended to be investment, financial advice, or a recommendation to invest in a financial product. Before acting on such information, you should consider the appropriateness of the information having regard to your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. To the maximum extent permitted by law, we Forward Path Advisory, Joel Cleary, Radhakrishna J. Balasingham, RASG, and Anandarasa Advisory, and Dhanshan Anandarasa disclaim all liabilities and responsibilities for any direct or indirect losses or damage which may be suffered as a result of relying on anything in this podcast, including any forward-looking statements. Past performance is not an indication of future performance. In particular, you should obtain professional advice before acting on the information contained in this presentation. Thank you.
Good, how are you?
Hi, Will.
Very well. G'day, Rads. Is that how I pronounce it?
That's right.
Rad?
That's correct.
Yeah. Good.
You been well? Everything good in your end?
Yeah. No, a bit busy, but it's you can't complain about that. It's pretty that time of the cycle where everything's ramping up, trying to get projects going and everything. It's bring on the UMDs.
I can tell.
Yeah. Trying to get financial models done.
Yeah. Yeah, about that. It's on the way.
yeah, good. It's So yeah, no, it's a good time to be in mining. I think just generally, as opposed to everything else, which is great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining and really appreciate taking your time and joining on our podcast. And Dano and I look forward to having this conversation. Before we proceed to the conversation, can you please talk us about your professional background and also your time working in Aura Energy, and also how long have you been involved in the mining industry?
Yeah. So I've been involved in the mining industry all my career. So I'm a chemical engineer by training. Took the path from chemical engineering into a metallurgy PhD. So I specialised in gold and mineralogical characterisation early on. So very much on the academic and the technical side, and started very early with sort of professional consulting. So I had run a consulting company for 20 years now, offering services in sort of process development, optimization, all those sorts of things. And that's how I originally started working with Aura. So I've been working with Aura for 12 years now, run through all of their projects and done a lot of the process development for those sorts of things. I've worked, uranium is just one of the commodities that I've worked in. I've obviously done a lot of work in gold, sort of a bit of a specialist in copper gold. And the optimization of gold out of copper projects. Worked on quite a few of the bigger copper gold operations. Lots of work in sort of more specialist commodities, so tin, rare earths, things like scandium and red muds, and then the more traditional base metals, so lead, zinc, those sorts of things as well. So I tried to steer clear of lithium and these things, but get sucked into there sometimes. So
A long career. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's a good. I've had a nice broad career, I think, is the thing. So I've always tried to look at different commodities and have just do projects that are fun is the other thing. And I find it really useful when you're looking at different commodities and then bringing them across to things. So things that you learn from the gold industry, or copper and flotation, you can apply in uranium and vice versa, and it makes for stronger optimization opportunities and process development. So.
And how do you describe the current market sentiment compared to historical? I know, like, especially with the uranium market, since the Japanese nuclear disaster back in 2011, uranium entered a bear market. And in the last 2 years, we have seen a bit of recovery. What is the market sentiment at the moment?
It's very, very positive. So I was just at the WNA symposium in London, so World Nuclear Association symposium, which is a bit of a bellwether, I suppose, for sort of internal industry, and that was very, very positive around SMRs and the growth in nuclear energy, and that's come about for two reasons. But the primary one is the energy crisis that we're dealing with at the moment globally. And people just looking for that baseload power and the low emission status of nuclear energy. From the uranium point of view, it's been a pretty dark time for the last 10 years since Fukushima, 10 or 11 years. And that's sort of, there's a couple of obviously sentiment and things in nuclear energy was a real sort of down. Everyone was aiming to shut nuclear power plants early and these things. Germany went completely offline. Japan was offline, which took us from a sort of market where we were oversupplied anyway. So there was a bit too much supply on board, which had come about because the uranium price was very high before then, and you can see uranium price can be high when we're oversupplied, and then there's been very little investment. So we've got to a situation now where there's a real supply crunch that's going to happen. It hasn't quite bitten yet, but it'll happen, and that's predominantly just there's been no investment in the fuel cycle. It's not just primary uranium, so mining. It's also in conversion and enrichment. So that's been exacerbated by the Russian geopolitical situation. But we're in a situation now where current global demand is, I think, 180 million pounds per year. We're producing 120 million pounds of U3O8 per year. And there's everything's ramping up very quickly on the nuclear energy side of things, and mines just can't ramp up that quickly. So.
And also the Japanese, they've started back their nuclear fleets as well recently, and they're going online. So it's an interesting time. And what's your thought behind uranium and the ESG investment framework, and how is your thoughts around investing in uranium and also investing in oil energy using the ESG investment framework?
Yeah, so nuclear is now widely recognised as a low emission baseload power source. There's not a lot of those. There's hydro and there's geothermal, which is they're obviously very geographically dependent. So uranium or nuclear is basically fairly well recognised now as one of our only options in terms of replacing coal. We can't go completely renewables at the moment. Our battery technologies aren't good enough, and we don't have enough supply of battery minerals. So we need something in there in terms of the base load that's going to replace coal and gas. So nuclear is very much that's got to happen essentially. So when you see the UK, you see France, you see Japan coming on back online. China is making huge. They've got 10 reactors sort of being built at any one time, and 150 new reactors by 2050. So that's going to really shift the balance of nuclear energy in the global electricity network, and that's current sort of that's current replacement of coal. And we're also seeing in that whole ESG thing, the replacement, electrification of cars, all these green industrialisation, hydrogen, and all these things coming on, which is going to put more pressure on the electricity networks and global energy production, which nuclear is going to have a really key part of. So the US has made a big push towards nuclear as a as low emission, and in that ESG sort of framework, the green taxonomy in Europe is a real push for that, and that will go through. I think that they're about to do the final vote for that. So it's now recognised as a green solution, which opens up a lot of potential investment that comes through, makes it much easier for banks to finance projects. And yeah, just makes it easier to get through, which it needs to be. There needs to be a lot of capital coming both on the reactor side of things and also in the primary production. So with Aura, we've definitely structured things to support that. So we've very early in the piece, we've done all our baseline emission studies for the Teresa project, which is a low emission project just by factor that it's a small project. So, and we're constantly working to reduce those emissions and make sure that we tick all the boxes from the E side of things, the environment, and social and governance is also pretty critical these days. So we're operating in an African country. It's a third world country, Mauritania. It's a great developing country, but we will go in there and we see a real opportunity to bring them up to the standards that we expect in Australia or the UK or Canada. So it's it's great to see the sort of the buy-in that you get with that. So it's it's an exciting time on that thing. I always see ESG, people sort of see it as a box you've got to tick, and I don't think that's the right way to view it. I think it's very much something that should be viewed as positives for projects, both on emissions reduction and the social and governance side of things. Can make projects a lot stronger. It is something we should be building in just to make projects stronger, whether or not it's required. Yeah.
Thanks, Will. Look, I agree that the sentiment is kind of changing, and nuclear is going to definitely have a part to play in terms of the overall energy mix, and the capital starting to come. But there still must be some, perceived risks and challenges for the up and coming producers that are going to be hurdles for them to get their projects over the line. What do you kind of see to be the biggest challenges? And given your broad experience across multi-commodities, is there anything that's, specific to uranium that might not be, typical of a mining project that you see as risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not a fast process to get the uranium project up and running. They're often in difficult jurisdictions, either difficult in the terms of that there's a lot of permitting requirements. So Canada, Australia, we see that in Sweden because they're developed countries that go from there, or that they're countries that you bring on into line with the requirements around uranium. So there are very stringent requirements around accounting for, or we call them safeguards in uranium. So making sure that every pound you produce, you account going through. So that requires a lot of input from the regulatory authorities within whichever country you're in. So Mauritania, they've got a good baseline for that. They haven't produced uranium before, but it's they've set up the laws to be able to track that very easily. And you do require a little bit more regulatory input just to make sure that your safeguards, your radiation management, all of those sorts of things are done within IAEA standards, and the International Atomic Energy Association standards. And it does restrict where uranium can be sourced from. So if a country isn't a signatory to non-proliferation agreements and treaties, then it makes it much more difficult to source uranium and export uranium to countries that are nuclear energy producers. It's an interesting industry in that in most cases, the countries that produce uranium don't use the uranium, and the countries that use uranium don't produce uranium. So it's a very geographically, geographically suspect, or not suspect, but it's got a lot of impact from geographical impact, geographical things. So, for instance, if you have an issue in Kazakhstan and you can't get uranium out, then that's going to have a really big impact on the entire industry. So it's something that means that there's a lot of moving parts in how we work. It's also a bit of an interesting industry in terms of how it's contracted and those sorts of things. So, which I think we'll talk about in a bit. So, so in terms of comparison to normal mining projects, a uranium project needs all of the same approvals as a normal project. You've got to have done all your environmental work to proper standard, all of those things, all your social engagement, everything. But you add that regulatory basis, which means that you've just got a little bit more of that to do and a few more boxes to tick. So it just means projects take a little bit longer. A lot of the projects that are out there now require a slightly higher price, incentive price to get into production. So it's so there's going to be some impacts on supply coming over the next few years because of that.
Yeah, no, thanks. So maybe let's talk about contracting now, and perhaps who are the typical types of contractors or offtake partners that the miners will engage with. What are they looking for at the moment? What kind of differences do they have in their approach, their attitudes to risk? I guess something I've observed is that the contracts are typically long dated or have high duration. I imagine that's quite difficult to manage, really, particularly in a highly inflationary environment. So who's got the bargaining power at the moment? Who are the players? What sort of insights can you offer us there?
Yeah, it's a pretty unique market, the uranium market. So your end users, wherever it comes from, whether it goes through a trader or the thing is a nuclear utility, and nuclear fuel buyers, so the people who are buying uranium and fuel for the nuclear power plants, no one's ever going to get sacked for paying more for U3O8. They're going to get sacked if they run out of fuel. So you're into an environment where they need to have security of supply for a long time. So the contracts are typically years that you're looking at. There are contracts out there now, RFPs going out for new contracts up to 2040. So it's and typically that's not unusual. So the market is very much driven by what those sort of nuclear utilities require. There's been a real shift in the last couple of years. Generally, they wouldn't. They try to minimise mining risk and won't do too much with greenfields producers or new producers. There's been a real shift in sentiment over the last 6 months, even where they're much more willing to talk to new producers and see where they can get that diversity of supply. The market tends to be, and has over the last few years, been a lot more dominated by cheap uranium out of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan produces 40% of the world's uranium. It produces it very cheaply because it's ISL, sort of in situ leaching. So it's a bit of a temptation for the utilities to just load up on that. It also enrichment coming out of Russia is also a little bit cheaper. So there's been a little bit of a bias towards that side of things. That's definitely shifted now, and people are valuing security of supply and geographical diversity as something which is really critical for the market. So yeah, the end users are the utilities. In terms of contracting, we can either contract with a trader, and there's not a lot of traders out there, and they'll trade uranium basically to the utilities, and it's called a carry trade. So they'll hold the uranium and be able to give a bit of flexibility to the utilities. Or you contract directly with utilities. They tend to prefer fixed price contracts, so you've got to sort of be fairly you need a reasonable incentive price to be getting forward, because they are quite long dated, although there's been a bit of a shift more recently to more market related contracts. There is the opportunity to sell into the spot market, and there's a few of the sort of financial instruments that have made the spot market a little bit more accessible. So the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust is the key one, and that's been one of the catalysts for the uranium price to take off. But the spot market's pretty thin. It's not something you want to rely on, and it can be pretty up and down. And it's not really a reflection of the price. I think the price on the spot market at the moment is $48 or $49 a pound. The long-term contracts that you're seeing written, like we're seeing them written, between $55 and $60 a pound, and that's a more real price, but it's not a very transparent price. So the price that everyone uses and everyone looks at, including the utilities, is that spot price, but it can be defined by 1 or 2 trades a week. So we when we look at contracting sort of plans, we look at a mix of traders and utilities, but you do want to contract most of your supply. Especially, our strategy has been to have a smaller operation that can then expand so we can give that confidence in the smaller operation, and work from there. So it's rolling
That's
straight
very
into the
exciting.
spot market isn't always the best way to do it, as we've seen in the past. So
Yeah, no, thank you.
And Will, with Aura Energy, there's been late last year and recently there's been significant changes to the board, and you have had new members join the board as well in business. And how has this benefited Aura, and what direction is the new board looking to take Aura Energy?
yeah, so we had a complete board reshuffle at the end of last year, and that was very much designed to put a higher power board in place that's got project development experience. So Aura's transitioned over the last couple of years from an explorer very much into that developer phase, and within a couple of years we aim to be a producer. So we needed a board that was comfortable with that and financing projects. And taking projects through. So we were able to, very fortunate in getting Phil Mitchell, who's our chairman. He's a very well-regarded guy out of Rio Tinto. So he was CFO of Rio Tinto Iron Ore. He's been with Rio for 30 years in sort of that senior executive level, and brings a lot of that sort of development side of things, M&A, and financing to us. So that's been a real benefit to the project, to be able to sort of get that view of things. Brian Dixon, who's also someone who's developed projects before, more in the Australian context, sort of business at ASX type of thing. Patrick Mutz we brought him on middle of the year. So he's a guy who's been in uranium for 30 odd years, in sort of executive roles. Brought Heathgate Resources to Australia and started the Beverley uranium mine. Has been MD previously of Deep Yellow, and has more recently been involved in, or is MD of Image Resources, which is a mineral sands producer who developed a project very similar. The front end of the Teresa project is very similar to a mineral sands project, and it's of a very similar size. So it brings a lot of that technical side of things. And then Warren Mundine is a bit of a stalwart in the Australian nuclear space, and an advocate for nuclear energy, and brings a lot of experience in that community engagement and the ESG side of things. So we've got a really good mix of skills within the board. They sort of complement. I obviously come with a very deep technical background and sort of understand the projects. And then the last piece of that puzzle is Dave Woodall, who we've just engaged as the MD. He'll start next week. And he brings that sort of project development and operations side of things. So we end up with a very strong board that's sort of set up for growth and set up for production. We're not interested in just rolling it through and not getting to production and just kicking a project along and making a spreadsheet project. It's very much designed, and you'll see that in the way that we've structured the project. It's something which is financeable and something which we can get into production and then grow. So yeah, we see Aura being a producer for a long time.
Fantastic. And please do talk about your flagship project in North Africa, the Teresa Uranium project. I know you're working with Mauritania government, and has there been any challenges or opportunities or political risk with this project, Will?
Yeah, no, the Teresa project's a great project. Like, it's if you're going to design the ore for a project, that's what you do. It's so it's a very simple project, and we've made it look as simple as we possibly can in terms of a mining and a technical basis. So it's a sufficient project. So it sits at surface. We basically scrape off 10 centimeters of sand and you're into mineralization, and then it only goes to a depth of 4 meters. So it's very shallow. There's no requirement for drill and blasting. It's just we call it free digging, which means you just get an excavator and you dig it up. So it's the mining cost is very low, and the fleet is very small. So that's something that drives towards our mining costs are low, and our emissions from mining fleet and all those things are very low as well. So that works very well. It's what you call a calcrete deposit, so it has a lot of calcite in it. It's similar to deposits like the Langer Heinrich deposit in Namibia, although not. It's sort of a young version of that, so it hasn't had a time to, we call it calcretize, which means that it just gets harder. So that's why we can just dig it up and throw it in. The main mineral, so carnotite, is a uranium vanadate, so it's got uranium and vanadium in it. And that's very, very fine grain. It sort of works as a dust on the outside of the weathered granite that we dig up. So there's these barren rocks, essentially, and the carnotite is very fine grain on the outside, which means that we can just wash it. We essentially put it in a rolling barrel, a rotary scrubber. We wash it and then we screen it, and the fine material, which is about 20% of the mass, so 80% of the mass got no uranium in it, goes straight back into the pits. 20% of the mass has 90% of the uranium in, and then we pump that to a central processing leaching facility, and then we go through what is a pretty typical leach facility to get the uranium out. So that's very small in relation to things. So we mine 1 million tonnes or 1.25 million tonnes a year in the first phase of the project. That leaching facility is only 250,000 tonnes per year. So very small. That keeps the power costs down, it keeps the reagent costs down and those things, and it keeps the capital down. So it means that we've got a project which, to be producing on average 800,000 pounds per year, the capital's only $74.8 million US, which is very low for a mining project, because of all those reasons that we have there, and because it's small and there's not a lot of power and there's not a lot of mining costs. The operating cost is in the sort of first quartile for those. For hard rock uranium, we sort of don't count ISL, so it's a different process. But so with $25.41 a pound of uranium for a C1 cost, and the all-in sustaining cost drops under $30 a pound. So it's a very competitive project from those perspectives, and it's also we're only using 20% of the resource that we have. So we have a resource of 56 million pounds. And we only use 20% of that for the first phase. So it's a very expandable project, and we've designed it to be expanded. So the back end of the project, so what is 15% of the capital that we're spending, is already rated to a throughput of 3.5 million pounds per year. And the front end, so the leaching circuit and the beneficiation circuit at the front is designed in a modular way, so we can just have trains of that we add on. So when we do expand, it'll be very capital efficient to expand. The operating cost will drop a bit because of we've got a very high proportion of fixed cost in the smaller operations, so we can make much better use of that resource. And there's a lot of potential in that whole northern Mauritanian area for a lot more uranium. So, and it's in a good jurisdiction. Like, Mauritania is a great place to work. It's a small country. It's Northwest Africa. It's pretty much all Sahara Desert. It's where the desert meets the sea. There's 4 million people there, and a lot of it, their economy is based around extractive industries, so oil and gas and mining. So, and there's big Western companies there. So Kinross, which is a mid-tier gold company, is there with the Tasiast gold operation, which is a tier 1 20 million ounce gold operation. First Quantum Minerals, which is one of the bigger copper producers in the world, is there with the Guelmagain copper gold operation, which has just been extended, and they've got iron ore mining with a state-owned operation which has been there for 50 years. So it's very developed in terms of their mining codes and their understanding of mining, and they're quite advanced in the way that they think about things. So as soon as we found uranium, so Teresa was a greenfields discovery, they put in place all the laws around how to regulate for it. So they ratified a nuclear law in 2010, which defined all the requirements around radiation management and transport of uranium, and that gives us a really clear pathway. Even though they haven't produced uranium before, it gives us a really clear pathway to export uranium and have the regulatory body monitor what we're doing. So we're working very closely with them, and that's sort of that is an advancement on a lot of countries where you see where they don't have that in place. They find a uranium project, and you've got to go through all of those processes with the IAEA to get them to a point where they're comfortable to export uranium. So we're very fortunate from there, and the government's really supportive of the project. So they're very helpful. So.
Thanks, Will. So, I mean, would you consider, the Teresa project almost shovel ready, or, obviously there's financing and the build itself, but what are the critical items remaining to get to that next level?
Yeah, no, so it basically is. So from a permitting point of view, we've got the exploitation permits, the environmental permits are all in place. We need to tick off that export in Mauritania. It's called prior authorization for production and export of uranium, but we're into that process now. yeah, so we completed a DFS, a definitive feasibility study, in 2019. It's a very simple project, so it's not a big project to go through. So it's something that we can get running fairly quickly. So we're doing a FEED, so front end engineering design study at the moment to sort of tighten up that the estimates around that, given inflation over the thing. We updated the capital estimate in 2021, so we've taken into account what we consider to be about half of that inflationary sort of pressure that you will have seen in between. And then we'll be in a position to make a final decision to mine sort of early next year, probably late Q1 next year. So we'll be in that position, and from there it's just a matter of getting into detailed design, procurement, and building the thing. So we've got one of the key considerations out there is water, obviously. So we've got sufficient water in a basin about 30 kilometres away, which was within what was exactly where we had our assumptions for the DFS. And so that gives us confidence moving that forward. And all of the other infrastructure is just we build it. So power will be a hybrid diesel solar installation. It's not a big power draw. It's about 7 megawatts, which is very low for mining operations because we don't have any crushing or grinding. So there's a lot of things that are ready. Well, the whole thing is ready to go in terms of that. We just need to get to that final decision to mine and move forward. And we'll be aiming to get into production. We'll get construction finished by the end of 2024 and aim for the first shipments of yellow cake in 2025, which, but for a small operation like this, is a very realistic timeframe.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really attracts me to Aura, I guess, is the simplicity and of the base case and how technically simple it is. But you're talking about expansion as well, infrastructure. Are you introducing new risks by going towards an expanded case, or do you feel as though the technical risk is still well contained, given the infrastructure that's available to the project?
Yeah, I think it's a project that will work a lot better at a slightly larger scale than what we're doing initially, just in terms of we can utilise that infrastructure a bit better. So in terms of the efficiency of capital and the operating efficiency, it'll be a much more efficient plant at a higher throughput. So it's technically the expansion. We have a lot of flexibility. So some of the issues that you have with expansion, for instance, is access to ore. If you've got an open pit, if you've got an underground, you've got to dig new shafts. If you've got an open pit, you've got to have cutbacks to access more ore. Whereas what we have in Teresa, it's everything sitting at surface and then just pods of mineralization around. So we just have to open new pods essentially, and they're over a couple of 100 square kilometre area, and it just gives us flexibility. It actually gives us more flexibility and reduces the risk if we've got multiple areas open, because we can blend and we can get a much more consistent feed into the process plant. So I think in terms of expansion, it's a much more balanced project at a higher throughput. And yeah, it gives us a lot more flexibility with what we do. So I don't think we're adding too much risk with that. It's more about sort of just making the most efficient use of the resources that we have there.
Okay, fantastic. How are you looking to finance the project? Has there been a lot of appetite with investors coming on board? What type of investments are you looking to take on in order to kickstart this project?
Yeah, so it'll be a mix of debt and equity. So we'll go out once we've made that decision to mine, and we'll put that final. Well, we're discussing now obviously how that package looks, but it'll be driven by a number of factors as to where we are from there. It's not a big amount of money. It'll end up being $100 million by the time you sort of add working capital and things into it. So we're not going out looking for huge amounts of equity. We're not going out looking for huge amounts of debt. So it's something that gives us a lot of flexibility with how we approach that package. And we're doing everything we can now to give us that most flexibility. So we're having a lot of discussions with traders and with utilities around. We've already got offtake for 15% of the production, and sort of filling that out to make sure that we give ourselves the best spread of access for the debt side of things, and also putting in place all of our ESG and all of our architecture to make sure that we can tick all the boxes from an ESG perspective for people. So it's the quantum of money is a much easier thing to do than doing a $300-400 million project, and the sort of appetite for Mauritania and uranium has changed a lot in the last few years. So people really recognise that geographical diversity as a real bonus. So we'll look for a spread between Australia and London. So we're listed on the AIM market as well, and that'll be a real benefit for us when we're putting together this financing to give access. London's is generally a little bit more comfortable with Africa and uranium, so it's we'll get that opportunity. And that said, there is a lot of flexibility with how you do it. You see, Boss Resources with the Honeymoon project have basically taken the complete equity approach with that in terms of when they've raised money for it. And the same with Paladin with the Langer Heinrich restart. So they've taken that sort of complete equity side of approach. So it's but we'll definitely look for a spread.
So on that, do you feel that those companies sort of have done that to retain a little bit of pricing power on the contracts, and would therefore like sort of Aura look to do something similar, perhaps, in terms of the execution strategy? You've got stage 1, you've got stage 2, which is a meaningful uplift. Are you going to look to, presumably you're going to just look to, secure offtake only on stage 1? Are you able to sort of give us a bit of, flavor on that? How are you going to sort of maintain, your pricing power and your advantage to potential uplift in the uranium price going forward?
Yeah, so we've taken probably a slightly different approach to those ones. That there's different reasons. So Paladin, for instance, did not do well with debt on the original development of Langer Heinrich. They got in a lot of trouble there, and so that probably has driven that, was speculation, but driven a lot of that decision. And one of the things that got that in trouble was that they really focused on the spot market and selling into the spot market. And when that collapsed, they didn't have any support. So that's sort of one consideration there. And Boss has taken the approach to not contract as much as early, but both of those projects are looking at getting a lot more uranium into the market. So £2.5 million for Honeymoon and 6 or 7 million pounds for Langer Heinrich. So they're big chunks of uranium. So what the approach that we've taken is to have the phase 1 project, which is a smaller project and isn't looking to get. So I've already got 150,000 pounds a year offtake, which is a way. So we're only looking to put sort of 500,000-600,000 pounds into the market, which means that we can do it at sort of current or current forecasted prices in terms of the fixed price approach to things, or if we can get market related, that's obviously better. So we can get the project up and running, and that's our real focus, is to get the project up and running, make sure that it's paying back its debt, all of those sorts of things, ticking a lot of the mining risk boxes. And then we see that Mauritania, once that's happened, will command a premium for its uranium, because it is close to Europe. It's a neutral country. There's not a lot of Chinese influence. There's not a lot of Russian influence. And we want to open that up. So one of the things we've got to do there is to get into production and reduce risk. So, and then we've got the expansion, which will be anywhere between 2 and 3 million extra pounds a year, which we can then do as the market has sort of got up there. You're going to see a real crunch, we think, in the next year or two. There's no capacity to bring new supply on in that time, so you're going to see some real upward pressure on the spot price, and consequently the contract prices. And so you're looking in that sort of 25, 26, 27 time frame, that there's going to be a lot of requirement for supply, and the pricing market, the pricing levels will be a lot higher. So I think the incentive pricing that companies like Cameco talk about, a lot of the sort of Australian juniors talk about $80 a pound being the incentive price that a lot of projects need to get into operation. We don't need that. We see sort of what will happen is the price will go to the moon for a while and it'll shoot up. We might be, I think last time it did that, it was hitting $130 a pound briefly, and then coming back down. And that'll happen. There'll be a spike when everyone gets gets unnerved and then goes forward with energy crises and these sorts of things. But it'll come back and it'll equilibrate somewhere between $60 and $80. You'd expect a pound over the next sort of 5 or 10 years. So it's which is good for us because the project does very, very well at those prices. So.
Yeah, I think that's right. In terms of the incentive price to bring on new supply, it definitely needs to sit a little bit higher than where it is right now to encourage that investment for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's and it needs it, like the market and utilities know that. They know how much is potentially coming online. All of the potential projects at the moment came back online. All of the brownfields projects, MacArthur River, Scar Lake, Langer, all of it. There's a couple in Kazakhstan. If they all came back online, we'd get up to 180 million pounds a year, which is the current demand. And that's not accounting for any growth. So there needs to be some of those higher price projects come in and come online, and so the price is going to have to get up there. It's a market reality. So yeah.
Okay, and just change gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about the upside at Terrace, but we haven't really talked about vanadium. So what's the strategy there? And how does, I guess, vanadium, battery metals, fit into the broader Aura strategy, I guess?
Yeah, so we've got vanadium, which will be produced from Terrace. We're just finalising the test work on the circuit for that as a byproduct. It's a small byproduct. It's about 30% of the uranium production. And that's sort of it's a good input into the thing. It's essentially will take somewhere between sort of $2 and $3 a pound off the operating cost, which is great. Vanadium is we see it as a huge growth in that battery metals space. I've done a lot of work in it with our other project, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's the vanadium redox flow batteries are something which are going to be more and more useful and more used in the electricity mix and the energy storage mix. So vanadium redox flow batteries are grid scale batteries. They're not the kind of things that go into cars or mobile phones or anything like that. They're very large. They're containerized, so and they utilize the chemistry of vanadium to store energy. So vanadium is a really interesting element in that it's this is my chemist coming out of me, but it has various valence states, so various numbers of electrons that can be there. So essentially, you can store energy within vanadium between itself rather than needing a different electrolyte and cathode to store the energy. So it means that you can have basically just store up vanadium electrolyte, put as much energy as you want. Maybe you just put more electrolyte and you come in over time. So for things like solar fields and things like that, you might be producing 100 megawatts of energy. You can charge that up through the day and then just bring 10 megawatts out overnight, and you can have that sort of good long scale energy storage. So it's much more effective for that sort of actual storage of energy than lithium and these other battery technologies, which are very good for load peak shaving and load shedding and those sorts of things, but aren't so good for long-term storage. So it's there's a lot of potential there in vanadium redox flow batteries, and we sort of see that as part of the energy mix going forward. So we've obviously got vanadium at Terrace. We've also got the Häggån project in Sweden, which is a huge resource with it's a alum shale resource. It's 2.4 billion tons of material there. It's loaded up with uranium. So there's an 800 million pound uranium resource in it. So the Swedes don't have uranium in their mining code at the moment, so we can't produce uranium, but that is looking like it will probably change. But it's got a lot of vanadium. It's got a lot of nickel. It's got a lot of molybdenum in it. So we have the opportunity, sort of on a longer scale project, to be producing significant amounts of vanadium into the European market. There's no vanadium production into the European market at the moment. The advantage of that project as well, the way that the mineralisation of the vanadium works, is that it's associated with potassium. So out of that project, we'd also produce a byproduct of sulphate of potash, which is a high value fertilizer. Once again, no supply in Europe. So and very much under pressure at the moment. A lot of supply comes out of Russia and the Ukraine. So it's a really good project going forward from that perspective. And then there's the opportunity, if the Swedes want to locally produce uranium, to add that as a byproduct if they want it. So, and that makes it a very, very attractive project. And we produce enough uranium to service the Swedish market. So, so we sort of see that, and we see that as a stepping stone. Like battery minerals, uranium companies, we don't want to just be a uranium producer in 5-10 years' time. We see ourselves being more of an energy company and sort of moving through from there. So you have the uranium side for low emissions energy, and then the battery metals side of things with vanadium to bring that forward. And we'll sort of develop that strategy coming through. We get a very good pipeline in that respect, in terms of that we can get Teresa up and running, alleviate a lot of those mining risks, expand it, and then by the time we've expanded it, we'll be producing good cash flow, and we'll be into the sort of time frame where permitting and these sorts of things will have run their course in Sweden, and we can develop that project.
So I know a lot of it's kind of out of your control in terms of the political environment, but in terms of immediate strategy, are there steps that you're taking to progress the project in Sweden? Maybe just in terms of studies, for example, what can you do in the background whilst it's sort of uncontrollable in terms
so we'll develop the project as a vanadium project with a sulfate of potash byproduct, and we're in the process of doing a scoping study on that at the moment. We're about to kick off the exploitation license application process and all the environmental baselining that goes around with that. So it's a good project as a vanadium project with SOP and a little bit of nickel and moly on its own. So we'll focus on that. We'll look at putting a battery metals complex in that central Sweden area. So working with one of the vanadium redox flow battery companies to actually put electrolyte manufacture there as well, and give some value add and some downstream processing for the region. So we're progressing those plans as fast as we can at the moment. The project is structured at the moment where we immobilise the uranium. So uranium's leached. We precipitate that in a calcium phosphate, which is the same method that you use to immobilise nuclear waste, essentially, and we put it back in the tailings. So there's no radiation out of it and all those sorts of things. And that's something that we do at the moment. The project is structured in that way. And it'll only be if the community and the Swedish people want to sort of actually produce that uranium, then we can switch the circuit. We have to be more capital into it, and we can put in a circuit to recover that. But we'll only do that at the right time. It very much will be a vanadium sort of battery metals project initially, which is something which Sweden is very, very keen on. There's a lot of push at the moment to sort of support that green industrialisation strategy that they have. They've sort of gone through the process of recognising that renewables on their own aren't the solution. Sweden's pretty fortunate because they've got a lot of hydro and they've got a lot of nuclear. But it's so they're sort of looking for there, and so they're looking at battery technologies, and they're looking at nuclear now again. So it's a good environment to be operating into.
No, definitely.
It's exciting time for our energy, and also what investors should be looking out for in terms of news flow in the next, say, 3 to 12 months. Anything exciting that they should be looking for?
Yeah, so we've got a lot going on at the moment. So we will, over the next, we're just in the process of finishing up a couple of things that we've been drilling out at the Teresa site, which is infill drilling to support that increased production target. At the moment, we need to increase the proportion of measured and indicated resources to support a bigger reserve. And so that drilling is finishing up at the moment. We'll have a revised resource by the end of the year. We're also working with the government to sort of finalise all the agreements which we have with them. The government has a 15% free carry in the project. So we're finalising those agreements at the moment, and that'll be completed by the end of the year as well. And then rolling out of that revised resource, we'll have a feasibility study for the second phase expansion, which we expect to be completed first or second quarter next year, and a revised reserve estimate, which will roll out of that as well. So there's going to be a lot of work around that sort of expansion and showing the real economic potential of the resource as we have it. We're also doing a lot of work on the regulatory side of things with the export permits. We're doing work with, and so there'll be sort of consistent news flow from there. we're talking with numerous utilities and traders around additional offtake, and we'd hope to have something over the next 3 to 6 months in terms of offtake. And we've also got the FEED study, so the engineering going for phase 1, which will culminate in that sort of decision to mine, final investment decision early next year. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening. And that's not even with Hagorn. We'll have all the work around. We're hoping to get a scoping study out reasonably quickly. So we definitely think ore at the moment has lagged behind our peers in terms of the market cap and those sorts of things. So we see that we've got a few things coming up that are real opportunities to re-rate the company and sort of get that full recognition for the value within Teresa and within Hagorn. We don't get any value at all for Hagorn at the moment. We've also got sort of as a side thing, we've got some early stage gold exploration tenements in Mauritania, which we're looking to do something with in terms of a spin out or something like that over the next 3 to 6 months. So it's there's a lot happening. It's definitely keeping me busy writing press releases. So I almost can't keep up. So that's yeah.
Exciting times. Thanks for your time. We'll really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to having another conversation, hopefully sometime next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to do it. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. And it's always good to talk about the company and talk about things. It's an exciting time in uranium. I think you're going to see a lot of movement, not just with us, but across the board. There's a lot of capacity needs to be filled up, and that's that should be interesting.
Thank you for your insights. We'll really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catch you later.